Solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. There are advantages and disadvantages to all the various methods in solving the quadratic equation. First we talk about solving by graphing. And we talk about solving by graphing because it's an advantage because you can do it all the time. Disadvantage is if you don't graph correctly or you graph in the wrong place, you're going to get wrong answers. We've also talked about solving by factoring. The advantage of factoring is it's pretty quick and easy, and if you can factor it and use the diamond to regroup that trinomial into a 4-term polynomial, and it works out that they have greatest common factors, then yeah, that's an advantage. Disadvantage is what if they don't have any greatest common factors? What if you can't regroup? It's not factorable. That doesn't mean it doesn't necessarily have an answer, just you can't solve it by factoring. Another method that we talked about before is by solving a quadratic equation using square roots. And that only works when there's no b in the trinomial, which is great. I mean, it's fast and it's easy to use, but a square root can only be used, that format in order to solve can only be used when no b is present in the standard form. And the last method, before we talk about this one, is called completing the square. And we've talked about completing the square in that, I'm trying to write and talk at the same time, completing the square. The advantages are, again, fast, direct, easy. Disadvantages, your a has to equal 1. The b, it should be divisible by 2. I mean, as long as those things are occurring, then it's fast and easy. If those things aren't occurring, it's not so fast, not so easy. So again, difficult. Now, the advantage to the quadratic formula is that it works all the time. Disadvantage? Let's take a look and see what the disadvantages are. This is the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, we have to have this memorized, and that can be a downfall if you don't memorize it correctly and able to substitute into it from the standard form of a quadratic equation. We're going to have some issues. So here's the a, here's the b, here's the c, and we take those values and we drop them into the quadratic formula. If you don't be careful with multiplying negatives, taking square roots, realize all of this is in the numerator, and just in the denominator is 2a. So we will get those two solutions of the parabola because of this plus or minus. Now, you might have seen a lot of different ways, if you look around on the internet, ways to memorize it. If you Google quadratic formula songs, you'll see all these different songs and ways to help you learn it. I have always used the song Pop Goes the Weasel. So you get to hear me sing a little bit as I try to do this for you. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So if you can use that little way to get you to memorize it, that'd be great. And then you got this memorized, and then you can use it. If you practice it a couple times, you'll find that it's easy to memorize. Well, let's practice just finding the a, the b, and the c for a second. So let's look at this here. And when we look here, we see that the a equals 2, the b is 3, and the c is 5. Let's try a couple more practicing finding the a, the b, and the c. Here the a is the number in front of x squared, which would be negative 1. The b is 4, and the c is negative 3. Remember, take that sign with you. And one more time, let's find our a, b, and c. Our a here is 3, our b is negative 1, and our c is 2. As long as we remember how to do that, we should be able to get our numbers correctly. And then it's just a matter of being able to plug it into the formula and use it. So let's take a look at an equation. Here we have 2x squared plus 7x minus 4 equals 0. So we find out that a equals 2, b equals 7, and c equals negative 4. And if we remember the formula, x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we substitute in the right places. So here first we start with x, the opposite of b. If b is 7, we need negative 7. Plus or minus, and underneath that radical sign, we're going to put 7 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 4. And all of that's underneath the radical sign. And put that all over 2 times a, which is 2. Let's work on simplifying this a little bit. X equals negative 7 plus or minus, and underneath that square root sign, 7 times 7 is 49. And let's simplify this over here as well. Because of these two negative signs, we know a negative times a negative is a positive. 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 4 is 32. And we're going to put all of that over 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. We're going to keep simplifying. Keep working along and simplifying. 49 and 32 is 81, and this is 4. So let's simplify a little bit more. I'm going to take it up to the side here so that everybody can see it a little better. X equals 7 plus or minus the square root of 81 is 9, all divided by 4. Now remember what this plus or minus sign means. That means that we have two answers. So let's split them to get our two answers. We either have x equals 7 plus 9 divided by 4, or x equals 7 minus 9 divided by 4. In this first case, we get 16 divided by 4, which tells us that 4 is a possible answer. Over here, we get negative 2 divided by 4 when we simplify. Therefore, negative 1/2 is our other answer. So our two answers to this, where the parabola will cross the x-axis, is at 4, 0 and negative 1/2, 0. Let's do a couple more problems to make sure that we can get the hang of this. Here I have 3m squared minus 8 equals 10m. Now the problem with this, we can't just jump into it and start solving it, is because it is not standard form. There's that 10m on the wrong side. So let's subtract 10m from both sides and get everything to the left side. Once we get everything to the left side and in order and set it equal to 0, we're able to pull out things. We can say that the a equals 3, the b equals negative 10, and the c equals negative 8. So remember your formula and start substituting in. So x equals the opposite of b, which would be 10 in this case, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 10 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is negative 8, all divided by 2 times 3, the a. We're just going to simplify now, just using order of operations. We're going to work on that square root symbol. Negative 10 times negative 10 is positive 100. A negative times a negative is a positive. 4 times 3 is 12, times 8 is 96, all divided by 6. Again, simplifying, x equals 10 plus or minus the square root of 196, all divided by 6. We're going to continue this up here so you can see. I'm going to simplify this. X equals 10 plus or minus, and the square root of 196 is 14, all divided by 6. So once again, I'm going to split those. I'm going to get x equals 10 plus 14 divided by 6, and x equals 10 minus 14 divided by 6. In the first case, I get 24 divided by 6, which tells me that the answer is 4. And in the second case, I get negative 4 divided by 6. When I simplify that, that's negative 2/3. So my two solutions to this quadratic, it's 4 and negative 2/3. That is where the parabola is crossing the x-axis. Let's take a look at a couple of more. Here we have the a equals negative 1, the b equals 1, and the c equals 1. And we're going to plug that into the formula. X equals the opposite of b is negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 1, times c, which is positive 1, all divided by 2 times negative 1. We're going to simplify this, working underneath that radical sign. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Again, we have two negatives, so we're going to add, and 4 times 1 times 1 is 4. Divided by 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. We're going to keep simplifying. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 5, all divided by negative 2. Now, we're going to leave it at this point. We're not going to take the square root of 5, because we know that the square root of 5 is this crazy long number, and since we want to be as approximate and as close as possible and not rounding to the nearest hundredth and be accurate, we're going to leave it in radical form. But we do have to keep in mind we do need to simplify things. So the only thing that really could simplify is the fact that there are two negative signs here, and we know that a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So our final answer then would be x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 5, all divided by 2. Now, I want to have a little discussion about how do you know, let me bring this in here a second. How do you know when you have no solution or when there's one solution? We've been looking at two solutions. So basically, this is what we've been looking at when there's two solutions, and we're coming up with what these two answers might be. But what happens when you have a parabola that doesn't cross the x-axis at all? And these are our no solution parabolas, aren't they? So when we talk about no solution, what does that look like? Well, we're going to have to take into consideration that we've got a certain thing going on. Let me go back and see what I'm talking about. Let's go back to this in the original thing here. Let me take a look at this. Hopefully you recognize that this part, negative b divided by 2a, that's the axis of symmetry. Remember, that's what separates the two sides of the parabola. So you're keeping that in mind and thinking about where we're just looking at right now. So we've got an axis of symmetry here. Let me draw a few of those for you. So like here's an axis of symmetry there, here's one here, here's one here. Okay, and when we're drawing axes of symmetry, what that does is it separates our parabola in half. Well, so there, that number is going to stay. Here in this case, see how that 1/2, that's going to be our axis of symmetry. But square root of 5 means you're going to be, that's how far you're going to be on both sides. Now, in order to get no solution, you can see the axis of symmetry still exists. So we're still going to get these numbers. What's going to change is what's underneath that radical sign. So the only way to get no solution is maybe to get a negative square root. We know that in the real world, this would give us no real solutions. Okay, and so that's what we're going to say when we get a negative square root, that we have no real solutions. There are solutions, but not in the real world. In the imaginary world there is, but not in the real world. Now let's talk about what happens when we have a graph that sits right on the y-axis, because we know that a parabola can either have two solutions, one solution, or no solution. So here, this is when we end up with one solution and one solution only. Well, again, we're going to take a look at that square root because the axis of symmetry is still going to exist. Here's my axis of symmetry. It's still going to exist no matter what. So what we have to think about is what would we put underneath that radical sign so that we'd end up with only one solution? Well, the answer is 0 because the square root of 0 is 0, and that doesn't affect it. So that would allow us to have the axis of symmetry being wherever that crosses the x-axis. That's also going to be our solution to our quadratic. All right, with that in mind, let's take a look at one more problem. 3x squared minus 7x plus 2 equals 0. We're going to say the a is 3, the b is negative 7, and the c is equal to 2. And we're going to plug it into the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. And we're just going to do the math. So x equals 7 plus or minus the square root. Underneath the square root, negative 7 times negative 7, positive 49. We only have one negative, so we'll keep it negative. 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 is 24. We're going to divide that by 2 times 3, which is 6. We're going to continue simplifying. 7 plus or minus the square root. 49 minus 24 is 25, all divided by 6. We're going to continue on up here a little bit. X equals, see if I can move that over out a little bit out of the way. There it is. 7 plus or minus the square root of 25 is 5, all divided by 6. So we're going to separate this into two answers. Either we have 7 plus 5 divided by 6, or we have 7 minus 5, all divided by 6. If we continue to simplify, 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 divided by 6 is 2. Over here, 7 minus 5 is 2. And 2 divided by 6 is 1/3. So those are our two solutions. So hopefully solving by the quadratic formula makes a little bit more sense to you, and you can see some of the pros and cons of it and what everything means in the terms of the big picture.